Well, thank you so much, Steve and Ismail. And Steve memorably brought back some of the amazing twinning events, Muslim-Jewish twinning events that he was involved with together with me. I was working nationally and came to Denver on a couple of occasions, which were also really, really memorable. And I met Ismail the last time. So, you know, we've been part of this adventure together now for more than 10 years, and it's been remarkable. Sabeeha and I wanted to start by also, you know, acknowledging what's going on now, because like countless other American Jews and Muslims, the two of us have been devastated and traumatized by the events of the past couple of weeks in Israel and Palestine. Together, we appeal for an end to the violence in Israel-Palestine and for a just solution to the conflict, guaranteeing peace, security, and self-determination for every Palestinian and every Israeli. We're very, very grateful that that there's now a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza, but that has to be monitored, and also we are very concerned about efforts to evict Palestinian families from their homes in Jerusalem and elsewhere. That must end, and sacred spaces must be respected, whether it's the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest shrine in Islam, or synagogues in cities like Lod that have been attacked by rampaging mobs. Equally as important, or perhaps even more important from our perspective here in America, that we pledge as Jews, Muslims, and allies here in America that we will not allow the conflict in Israel-Palestine to tear apart the alliance we built here in America. There have been some worrisome incidents in recent days, violent incidents that have been springing up because of the conflict involving Jews, Muslims, and others, and we have to stand against that as an interfaith community. We are brothers and sisters who love and respect each other and are committed to standing up for each other. If either community is under attack, we will redouble our efforts in the coming weeks and months to fight together against Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and all forms of bigotry, including the growing white supremacist ideology that is a deadly threat to both of our communities. Ultimately, we need each other. Sabeeha, would you like to start us off?
Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Ismail and Steve, for inviting us. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful Sunday evening when you could have been anywhere else. I grew up in Pakistan. In those years, I had never met a Jewish person. Pakistan was pro-Palestinian, and to this day, it has not recognized Israel. So I viewed all Jews through the lens of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In fact, my father's passport was stamped all countries of the world except Israel. Walter, how about you?
Well, I grew up as a lonely Jewish child in a mainly Gentile suburb of Pittsburgh. I was profoundly moved at the age of 10 by the book Exodus that was about the creation of the state of Israel by Leon Uris. And then, as though a good fairy had came and sort of answered my deepest wish, my father came home a few months after I read Exodus and said, well, we're moving to Israel next year. He had a sabbatical year. He was a physicist at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot. So I spent my 6th grade year there. I totally bonded with the country. I felt totally validated as a Jew and felt deeply at home. And yet I didn't meet any Muslims or Christians during that period. Then my family, my parents decided to come back, which was a difficult decision. We could have stayed. I desperately wanted to stay, but we did return to the States. But I promised that I would go back and live there because I thought that was the only place I could be happy. Sabeeha?
So the first time I met a Jewish person was when I came to the United States in 1971. My husband, who was a resident physician, took me to the hospital's Christmas party. Half the medical residents were Pakistani Indian and the other half were Jewish. And his Jewish colleagues were being very nice to me, like, you know, are you lonely? How can we help? And I couldn't reconcile my original negative perception about them with the reality of how good they were to me. And as the days and weeks and months progressed, I started realizing that all the wonderful new people in my life were mostly Jewish. The upstairs neighbor who took me under her wing and showed me the ropes was Jewish. My husband's colleagues and his boss who was mentoring him, opening doors for him, was Jewish. When I got pregnant, my obstetrician was Jewish. When I had a baby, the pediatrician was Jewish, and I loved this pediatrician. And then I end up buying a house in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. I had no idea what I was getting into. And my father, who was visiting from Pakistan, said, people of faith, no matter what their faith, make good neighbors. Your children will benefit from this community because they will raise their children with good values. Well, not only was he right, but I ended up getting a bonus out of it. I no longer had to explain to my children why I don't have a Christmas tree in the house or why we don't eat pork. How about you, Walter?
Well, I went back to live in Israel as I had promised at the age of 26. I spent the next 3 years there, and I became a reporter for the Jerusalem Post based in Haifa. So I was covering the north of Israel, where many of the villages and towns inhabited by the Arab citizens of Israel live. So I met many Muslims, many Christians all of a sudden. And in covering those towns, I became aware of the systematic discrimination that was endured by Palestinian citizens of Israel, and still is, as we've seen in recent weeks. But I found something else too, because I had these incredible personal encounters with the people that I was meeting, and they were deeply moved that I as a Jew would actually come out and spend time with them and hear their side of the story. And it felt very, very profound, like there was a breakthrough going on. But when I would go back to talk to my friends back in Haifa, my Jewish friends, many of them said, well, Walter, you know, you're a nice guy, but you're a naive American. You don't really get what's going on here. You don't understand what the Arabs really want, which is to destroy us. We know the Arabs. You don't know the Arabs. And eventually I started to say, well, have you been to the Ibeline village, or have you been to Nazareth and dialogued with the Arabs? And almost none of them had. So what it taught to me, I mean, I had to take seriously what they were saying, but the fact that I had gotten to know many more Arabs than having been there only less than a year than these folks who had lived there all their lives taught me something, which is about the incredible importance, the transformative power of personal encounters in breaking down the fears and loathing and not knowing each other. It's so important to know each other, and that became the main motif of the rest of my career as I now look at it. Sabeeha?
So for me, getting to know the others started with interfaith dialogue on the sidewalks. It was completely from the bottoms up, unplanned. I was a homemaker raising 2 boys, and I and my Jewish neighbors would be standing out watching our children ride their bicycles. We would be standing on the grass, and I guess that's where grassroots came from. And I must have invited them over for dinner. The conversation must have led to dietary restrictions. And now we are saying to one another, oh, so you don't eat pork either. Okay, so halal and kosher is the same thing. She must have asked me in for a cup of coffee. I would have said, I'm sorry, but it's Ramadan. What is that? And as one thing led to the other, and we started discovering one another, I realized that I would like my Jewish friends to meet my Muslim friends, because I don't want my Jewish friends to believe that maybe I'm unique. Maybe I'm not like the rest of the Muslims, like an outlier. I wanted them to see the rest. And I also wanted my Muslim friends to see how nice these Jewish families were. And so we started gathering in my home for dinner. It eventually led to gathering in larger venues and in public places. And that's how it started. The interfaith ball started rolling, totally unplanned, from the bottoms up. Walter, tell us about yours.
Yeah, well, I continued after I did return to the States in the beginning of the 80s. I worked as a reporter for the Jerusalem Post and the Forward and many other papers based at the UN. I covered the peace process between the Israelis and Palestinians, was personally invested in it. And then when it all crashed and burned in the early 2000s, it was a personal tragedy for me. And it led me to begin to explore Muslim-Jewish coalition building efforts in the US as a kind of alternative path to peace and reconciliation. A few years later, another good fairy intervened in the form of Rabbi Mark Schneier, who said to me, Walter, do you want to come to work for the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding as Muslim Jewish program director. So I accepted in a flash and did that for basically from 2008 to 2017. It was an incredible experience. Steve talked about some of the twinnings we were doing in Denver, and we were making those events happening all over the US and later also in Europe. So I was, my role was kind of matchmaker. In many cases, I would fly out to LA and kind of help to bring together an imam and a rabbi, hold their hands, sort of get them to the point where they would say, okay, we'll do a twinning event in November during the Foundation's weekend of twinning. So that was kind of what we did nationally and internationally. In any case, I often found myself on planes late at night flying somewhere, and the person in the next seat we would strike up a conversation. He or she would say, so what do you do for a living? And I would say, well, I twin Jews and Muslims. And so there would be this like look of shock and disbelief. And then when they saw I was serious, they often would say, oh my God, that must be the worst job in the world. And I would say, absolutely not. It's the best job in the world. It's that have this chance to bring folks together and cross barriers and get them connected and engage with each other. It's just so powerful. It feels like holy work for me. And, I wouldn't give it up for a minute. And also it's gone so much better than I thought it might at the beginning. So that's what I was doing. And at some point, a couple of years into that work, I called the American Society for Muslim Advancement to strike up, to talk to its president, Daisy Khan. And I got Sabeeha on the phone. Sabeeha was a close associate of Daisy Khan. And so we struck up a friendship, I guess we'd say. But at that point, we had really no idea kind of where it would lead.
So where it led was that one day the Temple Emmanuel was holding an interfaith iftar during Ramadan. I had signed up myself and my husband. When I walked in there, the person doing the registration was a Muslim gentleman. And he looked at the list and said to me, "You're not registered." I registered. He said, "Well, I'm sorry, but we cannot take in walk-ins because we are full." Walter just happened to be standing by, just happened to be. And he intervened and said, "Look, if she says I've known her for a long time," and eventually Walter prevailed and this gentleman let us in. And I chuckled and I said to my husband, the Muslim man was stopping us and the Jewish man let us in. But where this relationship eventually led was that in 2016, my memoir, Threading My Prayer Rug, was being published. And I realized that it would be nice to have an endorsement of a rabbi, Walter. Now, Walter is not a rabbi, but he worked for a rabbi. So I sent him an email. I was in Pakistan. I said, "Walter, I'm writing this book. Do you think that Rabbi Mark Schneier would write a blurb?" And Walter said, "I have to look at the book." I emailed him the manuscript, and this nice Jewish gentleman spent his day of rest on Saturday going through the manuscript, writes back to me and says, "Sabeeha, the rabbi will write a blurb, but I have an idea. Why don't the two of us write a book?" So Walter, tell us, why did you come up with that?
Well, I came up with for two reasons. First, I read Sabeeha's book, and it was a great book. It's so wonderful. So I can't recommend it strongly enough. Threading Our Prayer, My Prayer Rug. Just loved the book. But I had been looking for a Muslim co-author for a while and hadn't found one. And I thought, hey, Sabeeha could be that person. Basically, my idea was that I've been wanting to write a book with a Muslim co-author for a number of years because I wanted to tell the story about this movement that I was among the lucky folks who had helped to bring to life, this Muslim-Jewish alliance, and give an account of how successful it had been, because very few people then or even now really know much about that. And also this, by the time Sabeeha and I were having this discussion, I think it was, she said 2015, 2016, remember what was going on in those days in the country. And I thought that it's very, very important that we have a kind of a manifesto of why our two communities need to stand together, in the sense that we're both threatened by the rise of bigotry and authoritarianism in America. And so that's very important that we should stand together. Anyway, so that's what it was. So I said, "Sabeeha, you want to try?" And she said, "Yeah, let's get together." We got together a few times. And as we basically talked about what we wanted to put in the book, we also realized there were kind of four principles that really defined the work we were doing and others in the movement were doing. So we want to share those very quickly. So the first one is, if you save one life, it is as though you save the world. And, this is something that is in both the Talmud and the Quran. And it really expresses that both Judaism and Islam express in their sacred books the premise that life is sacred, and every individual life is sacred. So it's incredibly important. What I didn't know before I got involved, was that this I knew it was in the Talmud because it's almost every, as Steve could probably say, almost every Jewish event you go to, somebody, a speaker will bring that up. I had no idea it was in the Quran. I had no idea it was part of Islam. There was an incident in 2007 when I was still a journalist where a Muslim organization was honoring a young man named Hassan Askari, who had saved a Bangladeshi immigrant who had saved several Jews on the subway in New York who were being accosted by skinheads. He had jumped into the battle and really saved them, and he became the hero. He became sort of the subway hero, the toast of New York, and he was being honored. And the speaker said, as Hassan's brave act, his noble act exemplified, if you save one life, it is as though you saved the world. So it was really, really powerful for me to hear that, and also to realize, my God, this is so symptomatic of the similarity. There's so many things that are in both of our books that in our traditions that we don't know the other one has. So that was a very big deal. Sabeeha, do you want to share the second point?
Yeah, so the second principle, which is sacred to both our faiths, is welcome the stranger. It's in the Quran, it's in the Leviticus. My mother was welcomed as a stranger. My mother was a refugee. When India was partitioned by the British into India and Pakistan in 1947, she made the trek across India into the new land of Pakistan on a train trip. On the way, thousands of people were massacred when the trains were attacked. She barely made it across, but she was welcomed in her new land. That's where she lived. That's where she thrived. And until her dying day, she believed that if there was one place on God's earth that was made for her, it was Pakistan. Let's fast forward to 2016. The presidential elections have taken place, and now we Muslims are feeling that our very existence is at stake. My husband gets a call from the rabbi of the local synagogue saying, "We stand with you in solidarity, and I would like to accompany you to a mosque." So Khalid, my husband, took him for Friday prayers. And as he entered the mosque, he asked, "Should I remove my kippah?" "No, keep it on." He walks in, standing shoulder to shoulder, offering the prayers with all the Muslim congregants, looking very much a Jewish person. And when the prayers were over, people lined up to come up and shake his hand and say, "Thank you." One man walked up and said, "I wish I could give you a gift, but the only thing I have on me," and he held up his prayer beads. He said, "This is a family heirloom. It's very precious to me, and I would like you to have it." And this incident reminded me of Martin Luther King, who said that it's only in the darkness that you see the stars. Walter, your mother was a refugee too.
My mother was a refugee too. She was a refugee from Nazi Germany who fled at the age of 14 across the border with her mother on foot into Belgium, ran across the border, and then spent 3 years before they were able to finally get to America, running across France and then later to Spain and Portugal, always kind of a step ahead of the Nazis, but not knowing whether the Nazis were going to get to Portugal. They were having a very hard time getting visas. They were put on an endless waiting list to get visas to America because America had these very strict quotas at that time, which were quite anti-Semitic in nature. So what they finally did is they got on a boat that was going to New York, and then they were supposed to take another boat to South America because they had managed to buy Ecuadorian visas. They couldn't get US visas, but my grandmother, when they arrived in New York, first thing that happened was she was taken into the city by a representative of HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which still exists, that many of you I'm sure know. And to find someone who would sign an affidavit that with the same last name that he would take care of them, and that took a while. That took more than a week. Meanwhile, my mother was held as surety on Ellis Island. She was not allowed to leave until my grandmother came back with the visas, and they were able to stay in America. My mother then lived in 60 or 70 years, had an amazing life, a wonderful, fulfilling life where she raised 3 children, but also ran a small advertising agency. She was politically engaged because she wanted to make America, the country she loved, into an even better place in terms of civil rights and the anti-Vietnam War and so forth. Let me fast forward also to 2018, when I gave a little talk in front of the Supreme Court to a group calling on the Supreme Court not to pass the Trump Muslim ban in 2018, just before they unfortunately did go ahead and pass it. But I said at the time that what my mother went through, I told my mother's story, and I said, what she went through is so much like what Muslim refugees are going through today, people fleeing Syria and Yemen and Iraq, just fleeing for their lives, trying desperately to get here, and to hear them demonized, to hear them called, them or Hispanic immigrants called illegals. Well, my mother was also an illegal when she arrived at Ellis Island in 1941, and that dehumanization thing. So that made us very, very welcome the stranger is very much at the core for both Sabeeha and I. Third principle is tikkun olam in Islah. Islah is an Arabic word translating as reform, and tikkun olam in Hebrew means repairing the world. They're not exactly the same thing, but to me, they both convey the common moral imperative in both faiths to help those in society who are most in need. So a big part of what we did in twinning events across the country was going out and doing social action together. We fed a lot of feeding the hungry. We visited the sick and elderly together. We held health fairs where Muslim and Jewish doctors would voluntarily treat without being compensated, would treat folks who didn't have health insurance, many things like that. And to me, that really was the essence, to see or to experience, standing together in a line in a homeless shelter with aprons on, feeding hungry and homeless people. It did bring us together in a very, very powerful way that maybe nothing else did. Sabeeha, last one?
Yeah. So the fourth and last principle is standing up for each other. In February 27, when the travel ban was issued, it was a cold February morning. My husband and I walked into Times Square and found ourselves surrounded by hundreds of people holding up posters saying, "Today I am a Muslim too," except that they were not Muslims. They were there standing in solidarity with their fellow American Muslims against the travel ban. And this had been organized by Walter's organization, Foundation for Ethnic Understanding. As I walked through the crowd, I noticed a woman in a wheelchair. She must have been in her 90s. She could barely lift her head. And I wondered what it took for her to get there. Somebody had to have helped her into her heavy clothing, got her into a wheelchair, out onto the sidewalk, into a cab, folded and put away the wheelchair in the trunk, gotten her into Times Square, all the rest in the reverse again, and brought her in. And there she sat, protesting loudly with her silence. These people could have been anywhere on their day off, which was a Sunday, but they chose to come and stand there for hours in solidarity with their fellow Muslims. It was not too much later that the tables were reversed, and now it was turn for the Muslims to stand up for their fellow American Jews. Tell us about it, Walter.
October 27th, 2018, the terrible news that we all received of the attack by a neo-Nazi gunman at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where 11 Jews of prayer were gunned down just for who they were. Of course, for me, this was my hometown, so that was traumatizing. But it was just shocking to be, witnessing this horror on CNN, and then suddenly to see on CNN on the TV literally to see this group of Muslims from Pittsburgh who had rushed over there when they heard about this terrible crime and standing just outside the police line, just saying, "We're here for you, Jews. We're together. You know, tell us how we can help." That was the Pittsburgh Muslims, but then within 2 days, within 48 hours, Muslims across the country raised more than $200,000 for the stricken Pittsburgh Jewish community. Really an unprecedented outpouring. And then finally, a week later, when they had the Shabbat across America, Shabbat events for the Tree of Life in synagogues across America, and this may have happened also in Denver, that so many folks, non-Jews, came out to these events, and Muslims were out in huge numbers. And I just remember being in a synagogue in Falls Church, Virginia, and seeing this huge outpouring of Muslims being there, and just being there with me, and that felt so wonderful. And so there was a man standing beside me, about 40. He had his two small children with him, and I said to him at some point, "I'm so glad you're here, but it means so much. But do you have any concern that your kids, this may affect them, that to hear all these gruesome details?" And he said, "Oh no, I have to be here when my neighbors are attacked, when my friends are attacked. I have to be here, and I want my children to be here. I want them to get this lesson in life early." So that was really a transcendent moment. Sabeeha?
It hasn't always been easy. We have had our share of challenges. What I have faced in terms of challenge is that it's very difficult to mobilize the Muslim community in interfaith dialogue. I'm not sure what the reason is. It could be that we are small in numbers. I don't think so. It could be that we are still a young community in terms of evolving, possible. It could be that the trajectory of the immigrant Muslims is still at a phase where the mommies and daddies have full-time jobs and they're constantly shepherding their children from one activity to the other. But it also could be a feeling of distrust. And particularly when conflicts break out, then they tend to pull back even more. But whatever it is, it's a challenge. Then there are more challenges. Walter, tell us about that.
Well, I just want to say very quickly that I've seen sometimes because I've worked in, as I said, many different cities. Sometimes it's the Muslims who hold back for various reasons. Sometimes it's the Jews who hold back. So I've seen both, and oftentimes, so what's that all about on both sides? Often it's about the two elephants in the room. The first one we've already discussed at great length, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and oftentimes the pulling back happens when these eruptions of violence happen over there. And people who have already built solid relationships, rabbis and imams, Muslim and Jewish leaders, suddenly aren't picking up the phone and calling each other, not because they're really angry at each other, but they just feel really awkward and don't want to have that difficult conversation. And that tends to put things back for a few months before we come back again. So it's been this time, actually, we've seen much more reaching out than in past years. Groups like the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom issued a powerful statement on this, but it remains a challenge. There's also another elephant which is less talked about, which is, there's passages in the holy books of the respective faiths that can be off-putting to the other, and I've often said, I've talked about that. I've personally, when I first read the Quran, and especially the passages about the children of Israel, I felt sort of personally offended, and I said, boy, it's just really harsh the way the Jews are being related to in the Quran, that they're being castigated for worshiping the golden calf and not obeying Moses when he went up on Mount Sinai and all those kind of things. And so I would talk to my imam friends about this, and they would say, Walter, but that comes from the Torah. It says very much the same thing in the Torah. And I had to say, you're right. You're absolutely right. But, there's this thing, psychological thing that we all need to keep somehow in mind, which is it's much easier. It's very easy for, and we see this in all the different groups, ethnic and religious groups, to criticize your own and to laugh at yourself, your own people, but God forbid anybody else does that. So the key point in both elephants is the importance of picking up the phone, because once you have that conversation and you then can sort of process that and say, well, okay, well, I see where that was coming from. And so, you know, picking up the phone, I think, is where we're at right now. Sabeeha, do you want to run through the lessons we've learned to conclude our presentation?
Yeah, so we'll share with you 8 points. Number 1, we are Americans first. And while the Israeli-Palestinian conflict matters greatly to us, we live here. And our common homeland is at threat unless we all come together to fight for preserving democracy and pluralism. Number 2, speak out and stay engaged together against injustice, both at home and abroad. Number 3, Muslims and Jews should support the work of NGOs in Israel-Palestine that work to improve the conditions of the people on the ground and save lives. And an example of that is Project Rosanna that Walter is very much involved in, that is about transporting children from, sick children from Palestine to Israeli hospitals and back and forth for their treatment. Number 4, allow others to speak up even if we do not agree with them. So whereas we know that there are congressmen and elected officials that speak up in support of Israel, there are new members elected to Congress, and whether we agree with what they say or not, they do have a right to speak up as well. Number 5, don't allow Israel-Palestine issue to be weaponized by the elected officials. Number 6, let's not denigrate or demonize people on either side. Activists have a right to speak out, and let's engage with them. Let's understand that even if we disagree with them, particularly those who speak out against Zionism, we should know that they still have a right to speak out. Number 7, Muslims should engage with mainstream American Jews who consider themselves Zionists rather than allying themselves exclusively with fringe groups or with groups that we see eye to eye with. And likewise the same on the other side. And finally, let's be cautious about labeling one another as anti-Semitic or Islamophobic. We acknowledge the sensitivities on both sides, but we should recognize that if we are criticizing the policies of a particular nation, Israel, for example, if we are criticizing the leaders and their policies, that's just it. It's not a criticism of an entire community. And the same for Muslim leaders and their policies. But let's remain sensitive to our sensibilities. And with that, we conclude the formal part of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fabulous. And I'm thinking of something you just said a few minutes ago, Walter, about this interesting phenomenon that I've experienced, but I hadn't thought about, which is even if you have relationship across boundaries of difference, at certain times of tension, the temptation is to not connect because I don't want to threaten, you know, the status quo of that relationship. So I'm not going to call you right now.
Right.
And I feel very lucky that over the last couple of weeks, I've talked to a lot of people from different sides. I've had Muslims call me. I've talked with Palestinians. I've talked with Israelis and lots of people, and it's just been very lucky. So now is our opportunity to, in a similar way, let's imagine we're all friends here. What questions, let's reach out to each other. We'd like to take some questions for Walter and Sabeeha, and really you can ask what you want. I think we'll, it's okay, we'll ask people to unmute themselves, you know, when we sort of, as we organize the questions. So I think the first one is actually for you, Benita. You had a question that you'd like to ask our presenters. Can you unmute yourself?
There we go. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to hear you both speak very, very much. Thank you for being here and for organizing this with Ishmael and Stephen. And I had kind of a two question. One is very personal in terms of what do you would recommend the best way for people to actually cross those lines in this country to be, you know, people, the best way to get to know the other, where do you recommend people seek that out? And then secondly, on an international level, President Biden is talking about wanting to, it appears as though he's wanting to pull back the United States from our involvement in the Middle East. And that just is a concern to me. And I just wonder where you think we would have a voice with the president and what would be the best recommendation to him.
I'll try and tackle the first part. I think your question was, how do we engage with one another of people of different faith? Bonita, was that your question? Yeah, so there are many, many opportunities now. I'll mention a few. There is the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, which is Muslim and Jewish women coming together to overcome biases and prejudice, and there are chapters all over the nation. So you can either join an existing chapter or start a new chapter. The condition is that you have to have equal number of Muslim and Jewish participants. The other is the Muslim-Jewish Solidarity Committee. This is something that Walter helped spin off, which is their philosophy is that we're not going to wait for a particular holiday to take place to have an interfaith gathering. We will do events year-round, and it could be anything from cultural to literary to arts to music to just walking through an ethnic neighborhood. And they have expanded their base to include people of other faiths as well, but it is primarily Muslim-Jewish. You may want to start an interfaith book club. I have been part of one for many, many years, where we have the 3 Abrahamic faiths get together. We read, we rotate the faith book each month. It could be a novel, it could be a memoir, it could be something academic, you know, pick whatever suits you. And that leads to some very, very interesting and engaging discussions. Make a Muslim friend. If you know of a neighbor, or if your family members, you know of a Muslim person, invite them into your home. Ask them to invite you into their homes. Meeting in public places is great, but when you are sitting across from the kitchen table and breaking bread over a meal, the intimate dialogue that you have is much more meaningful than a 1-hour interaction in a public place. So those are just a few that I can think of. Walter, let me turn it over to you for the foreign policy question.
Sure. Well, in terms of President Biden, U.S. policy, I certainly don't blame him at all, President Biden, for sort of when he came into power, there was enough to deal with on our plate here. That why would he want to take on this thing, a thankless task with Israel-Palestine? But the events that have taken place over the last few weeks show that that's really not tenable, that the U.S. does need to be actively involved as an honest broker, not fully on one side as President Trump was, because that's destructive, but to play a role of working to bring the two sides together as much as possible, and upholding some of saying clearly, I think, some of the points that we made in terms of the home evictions, in terms of many things like that, the inviolability of the holy sites. So I think we do have an important role to play, and I think that I think the interfaith community needs to say to the administration, listen, you really need to help heal this situation that is deeply damaging, not just between Israel and Palestine, but the larger world, including here at home. Thanks. Anybody else?
There is one more question in the chat by Sabe. Let me answer that question. So it's a question for Sabeeha. Will you give us more context on why kids need to be transported from and to Israel for medical purposes?
Okay, so I will refer that to Walter because
Sure.
he's directly involved in that project. He can speak better to it.
Sure. So I think it's such a wonderful project. It's really about the if you save one life, it is as though you save all of humankind that we mentioned at the beginning. So here there are the children inside of the Palestinian territories with cancer or in need of kidney dialysis, and unless we get them to these hospitals in Israel, they're going to die because the hospitals inside of Palestine at this point are not able to provide those services. So what we've done there is the Project Rosanna has organized a network of volunteer drivers, both on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, to get them to those hospitals because the families can't afford to pay. Many of them are from remote villages, so there's no transportation, so they would have to hire taxis and would cost them hundreds and hundreds of dollars because many of them are going back and forth. So that's an example, about saving life. And on some level, some people find it controversial. Some on the Palestinian side, well, this is some kind of a form of collaboration, but it really is first and foremost about saving lives, improving conditions. There's other Project Rosanna things that improve conditions, medical conditions in Palestine. So eventually, we're helping to train doctors. So eventually, they won't have to make that trip. But right now, they do need to make that trip, and that's really what it's about. Thanks. Yeah, I guess Fran.
You got to cut it off for other maybe today.
What you mentioned collaboration, and I'm thinking that if there's ever a possibility where love is not possible, it's when collaboration becomes inaccessible, whether it's a child removed from their parents for whatever reason, emotional removal or physical removal. What could be done to increase collaboration for basic needs, not just health, but homes and food, etc., so that there is a more possibilities and more accessible possibilities for collaboration between Palestine and Israel.
So I would just say that, first of all, there is much more of it going on than most of us here are aware of, certainly more than I was aware of than when I got involved. Project Rosanna is one of maybe 100 programs in Israel and Palestine that is doing this kind of work in different fields. So there's a whole network of incredibly wonderful people on both sides who are doing this work against tremendous odds. And I think it's so important that we support them. And, one thing that I want to say very briefly is that there's an opportunity for interfaith groups like your own to help, make the whole Israel-Palestine connection almost a plus rather than a negative. Because if we support these groups that are on the ground and we get involved, we get some skin in the game there, we get engaged, both in terms of some financial support, but maybe making trips, going over, getting involved in different ways, that also makes a huge difference to give them, because they're obviously not getting off, most of the time are not being supported by the governments on both sides. They're fighting against tremendous odds, but that is really a huge part of the way to not only to do this humanitarian work, but to build those human ties between Palestinians and Israelis.
Many years ago, I was in Israel. I was in Israel on sabbatical, and we did some research, and we found over 200 NGOs working on coexistence. So, like Walter just said, most people aren't aware of that. But one of the things I always like to encourage people, that might in some ways feel even better, is to support organizations on the ground that are working for coexistence. It's like, what better way than to help the people who are there do the work they're doing? So, I mean, I could talk all night about, New Israel Fund, New Jewish Agenda. Hope Flowers is the school for Bethlehem in the West Bank. Anira does amazing support for bringing medical supplies into Gaza and other places. I just learned about an organization called Standing Together, which is Israeli Arabs and Jews who are now publicly standing together against discrimination or trying to separate them. Women Wage Peace. So what I would really encourage is pick any issue that you care about or any group that you care about and do a little research, and you'll find organizations on the ground there that you can support. We just got another minute or so. Any other, what is an NGO, a non-governmental organization, like the ones I just mentioned? So, yes, maybe we should let you guys wrap up.
You know, I'd like to just share one experience that I have had, and this sort of piggybacks onto what Bonita was asking about crossing boundaries. I have a lot of family in Pakistan, and they visit. And when they come to visit, they like to see all the touristy places. So we take them there, but then we also take them to a synagogue on a Sabbath service. And just one incident where Khalid's niece was visiting, and when she walked into the synagogue and the usher welcomed her saying, Shalom Aleichem, she said, oh my God, that's just like Salam Alaikum. And then we sit down and we have the prayer books, and she's looking at it and saying, if I didn't know, if I hadn't read the cover, I would have thought I'm reading the Quran. And after that, all my Jewish friends are saying, let's take you out to dinner, giving her tips on how to make the most of her experience. And she will then spend half the night writing to her mother in Pakistan, sharing the experiences of all these wonderful Jewish experiences that she had. And that then just chips away at the misconceptions that people have across the world. And every time somebody stands up for us over here in any which way or form, my husband is putting in on the social media, beaming it all over in the Muslim diaspora, all his family as far as Australia, saying, look what all these people are doing to help us. And that goes a long way.
I have to offer a correction. I mentioned New Jewish Agenda. I don't think that's existed for quite a while. But there are Jews and Arabs, Palestinians and others, all supporting an organization called J Street, which works very actively to promote a two-state solution. So I would check that out as well. Ismail, anything else for now?
No, I don't have any other questions in my chat.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here.
Hey, I'm sorry. Can I say something? I'm sorry, just really quick. My name is Linda and I'm a Palestinian, and I would just like to leave everybody with the message of, first of all, thank you to our presenters, but with a message of really going and researching and really truly learning what's happening in the Palestinian territories, because I have been fortunate enough to grow up both here and grow up there. And I was in fact born in the old city. But when I went back there 2 years ago, it took me 6 weeks to get a visa to be able to go and pray at the Aqsa Mosque. And somebody who's born here or anywhere else in the world who is Jewish is able to get in, you know, in a heartbeat with no questions. So I really would urge the people on here to go and read and not just rely on the media, but really read more reliable sources to learn about the oppression that's taking place in the Palestinian territories. And I just want to be clear, I've gone to Temple Emmanuel, I've been part of the interfaith dialogue. I myself was a peace camp counselor for seeking common ground, building bridges for peace for a number of years, and it was wonderful. And I made Jewish friends for the first time, even though I lived in Palestine, was never able to meet one Jewish person, and made my Israeli friends, but sadly we are separated. So no matter how often I go back and visit back home, I'm unable to see them. They're unable to come visit me in my home. And these are the kinds of things that continue to make it so difficult back there, because there's a true apartheid, there's a true separation. And it is good to be a part of the organizations that are here, and that's a start. But I really just hope you can go and read and really learn about what's taking place in the Palestinian territories especially, and the oppression that's happening on a daily basis, especially with the checkpoints, with the settlers that attack the villages regularly, with the land that's taken with no permission, with homes that are taken with no permission. You know, and that's what makes it hard for the people that are there, that are living through it day in and day out, to be able to step outside of that and think differently, because that oppression day by day by day is naturally going to eat away at you as a human being. So even working here and trying to be part of the interfaith groups, I'm not going to lie, it's very hard for me to keep watching this happen over and over again. And then, you know, for my 8-year-old to tell me, Mom, it's hard for me to want to go back to our village, because all I could see is the Israeli soldier pointing the gun at me at the checkpoint, and I didn't do anything. Why is he pointing a gun at us? So I really, again, I don't want to take up more time. I know you guys were getting ready to get off, but I would urge you to go back and read and learn more about exactly what's happening on a daily basis. It has nothing to do with the land. It has to do with the daily, you know, living, daily lifestyle that is a daily oppression for each and every Palestinian as we speak. Thank you.
Well, I just speaking as a Jew, just very briefly, Linda, that is very moved me very, very much what you said. Thank you for your courage and speaking out and sharing that truth. And we, all of us, have to try to do everything we possibly can to, you know, from here to make that end. And so thank you so much for sharing. That was very powerful.
Yes, and I agree that the biggest challenges being in the United States is that it is really impossible to really know what's going on both sides if you're only reading American press. Or I would say, frankly, if you're reading any one piece of, you know, getting your news from any one source. So it's really important to get your information from local sources there, I would say, or multiple sources there and here. And try to put it together. Plus, it's just so complicated. But thank you, everybody, for coming.